Fajr, the Falestine Film Collective that's now supporting the film, is not something that formed until after the completion of the film. After we realized that we were going to have quite an interesting time integrating this into the film community, as I mentioned, because it kind of traverses the boundaries between documentary, fiction. It's very experimental, and we kind of wanted to use it as a window to support experimental filmmaking coming out of Palestine, because there's such a oversaturation of stories told in a very similar aesthetic. We ourselves did 12 documentaries in a very traditional documentary format, and we felt that only by kind of transcending some of the traditional ideas and storytelling methods could we really access some of the more subtle emotions and senses of some of the people whose stories we received throughout our time there, because the emotional reality of those stories was something that really went beyond. So Fajr Film Collective is something we put together after the film to help support its distribution. It's a collective of a bunch of artists located in Palestine, and also a bunch of us here in the States and Canada, who are using this film to launch a project to support and nurture experimental film coming out of the region. So all of the proceeds that this film has been receiving are going to the film collective, and our goal is to fund 5 films coming from independent filmmakers in the region. And we already have been receiving applications for many projects that are super visionary, very absurdist, very brave storytelling methods, a lot of satire and surrealism being used in this new wave of artistic approach to the subject matter. So that was why we founded it after the film, and also just to create kind of a support network for our own work here, which is now being distributed independently by us and the collective. It's actually available for download online now at our website, which is marsatssunrise.com. And all of our previous documentaries from Eyes Infinite Films are also available on eyesinfinite.com. So if you're looking to learn more about some of the people featured in this film in a very abstracted fashion, you can learn about their true stories in one of the 12 documentary films available online on our website. Sure. The main painter is based on Hani Zurob's life, his testimony of his time in prison, and a lot of what he relayed to us about his experience was told to us in a very heartfelt way, something that we really were moved by and inspired to tell, because he maintained a very kind of liberated energy throughout his struggle. And he's been exiled in Paris for about 7 or 8 years now. He's also hasn't seen his family in Gaza, and I think it's like 15 years. And he's an incredible painter. And in the beginning, he's featured in 2 of the documentaries that we made before in the Beyond Blue and Gray documentary project. So if you want to meet him, you can go to the website and watch his testimonies firsthand. But in the beginning, he was like very happy that we wanted to share his story, but he was very reserved because it's very personal, and he also wasn't sure how it would be integrated in a film that does work with Israelis, as you can see, and due to his loyalties to the boycott movement, which we are also in line with, but it's something very specific to being on the ground trying to navigate artistic projects there. It's something beyond stratifications of one side or other side of the wall. It's more ideological alliances. And so he wasn't sure at first, and then after 4 years of working and kind of cultivating a script that was his story and many other people's stories as well, integrating some of the details, we brought him the final project in Paris, and he was more than happy to support it and to come out openly sharing that this was his story. That was we never expected that. So for us, that was a real blessing that he felt that the story we told here was resonant enough with his own story that he fully backed us up. So we're super grateful to him, and yeah, please learn more about him. Watch his story on our website, eyesinfinite.com, and Beyond Blue and Gray, or Meet Me Out of the Siege. Those are the names of two of the documentaries he's in. I wish that were true. The reason he's currently in exile in Paris is because he was given a permit to go do a residency in Paris about 7 years ago, if I'm correct. And during the time of his presence there, he was only supposed to be there for a year. You know, like the regime in Palestine shifted, laws are constantly changing. They took away his permit. As you saw in this film, the boundaries are constantly in flux, and the identity battle is constantly changing. People are always experiencing different ways. There's no consistency. So he's still in Paris. He hasn't seen his family in Gaza. He's currently separated from his wife. He's pregnant with their third child because of she's from the West Bank, from Hebron, and she's been also struggling to get permits to go back and forth to Paris, and now she's stuck as well in Jerusalem, because if she leaves now, she's just received her blue ID, her Jerusalem ID, and if she leaves, she can't come back. It's super complicated and specific to each individual story. Applying for permits is something that is beyond my logic. It's one of the most stratified regions in the world, and one of the first questions anybody ever asks you, whether you're in Israel or in Palestine, is not like, where are you from, or it's, what are you? And, you know, we identify as human beings. We're not necessarily allied with people who are on, you know, one nationalistic tendency or another. We're more allied with people who believe in truth, like justice, speaking truth to power, you know, people who are fighting for the rights of human beings on the ground. And we really try to touch the shared struggle that, that many people on both sides are experiencing. And of course, there's very many manifestations of that, and they're not really comparable. We never in any way try to do an equalizing platform to tell both narratives in that very like comfortable fashion that's constantly being used. But I don't feel that I feel that if there's a bias, it's a poetic bias. I feel that like the soul of these two men is one, you know, and in many ways, like the way we chose to portray them, it's just two sides of our consciousness, of our collective consciousness, one that is struggling against oppression to express itself creatively, and the other who, as a creative being, is living in a somewhat like free reality in their imagination, but in the reality, on the ground, have a hard time accessing the freedoms in order to express themselves creatively. So we kind of try to capture the internal duality rather than this external us-them narrative. Yeah, well, the checkpoints in the film here are, other than some, when you see him running and you see, you know, the entrance to Ramallah, you see the checkpoint there, that's the real checkpoint. Much earlier on, actually, it's much more developed now, super high security situation. That was when it was like covered in graffiti and looking somewhat makeshift. Now it's much more built up since I've been there. But the checkpoints that you see, the soldiers sleeping and so forth, are ones we created. Most of our sets are around Nablus and around Nazareth, and we fabricated most of those, like trying to replicate checkpoints we had been in and experienced situations in. They're a little late. All the films are done. But at this point, you can help us by helping to circulate the films. Even the documentaries, which were released in 2007, have an incredible relevance to this day. They're all portraits of artists working both in Israel and in Palestine. There's the Art and Apathy documentary project, which is dissident Israeli voices, and then there's Beyond Blue and Gray, which is portraits of Palestinian artists working in every medium to kind of contrast the dominant political narratives that saturate these issues. in all of our films, like our film company's Eyes Infinite Films, and our mantra is, documenting the relationship between art and social change. We believe that artists really have the ability to break through the stagnicity in the rhetoric, political rhetoric, and just, defy, break through the barriers in the mind that people have when relating to Palestinians or Israelis or the issues. There's so many redundant narratives that circulate in the media and circulate in so many films, and we really, really believe that highlighting the work of artists who are the light on them is very dim. If they're not, their voices are not very loud in regards to our international reception of information from the region. And so we really wanted to devote our lens to those voices, and to show that there's a lot of power in being a creative person living in a militarized society, whether you're under the occupation or you're living in a country where military service is mandatory. People who are using painting, photography, poetry, dance to really break through the suffocation there. We were super inspired by it, and after being there almost 9 years on the ground, I wouldn't put a lens or a microphone to anyone else's life other than an artist. So that's why we chose to do that. Absolutely. And this is real, the hurting of our people in the artistic community for heavy interrogation, and for, there is a perceived threat that the establishment feels from the artistic community, and I think that's true everywhere in the world right now. But people who, in the face of even that kind of systematic suppression of creative voices, who are doing it because there's no other alternative, you create because you have to. You have something in your heart, something in your soul that needs to be expressed and shared. It's a way of liberating yourself under such circumstances. But I know many artists in Palestine who, their medium it's kind of used as an alternate dimension in which they enter and they experience freedoms that they don't experience in the world around them. So, whereas Israeli artists tend to have a little bit more freedom in terms of, especially performance art. Performance art is something that's very difficult to manifest space for in Palestine. Although it exists and it is growing, you live with a much greater threat to your expression there. But people are doing it, and I would really love it if you guys would watch the documentaries that were kind of the segue to this work, and you can find them all on eyesinfinite.com, and marsatsunrise.com is where you can download this film, share it with your friends, spread the word. And thank you so much for being here. Any questions? I think we're good. That's it. Thank you.